Hi everybody, welcome back to my home office, and we're going to talk about workflow analysis now and really get into the benefits of understanding how work flows, how process is designed in your particular organization, pharmacy, healthcare facility. So the benefits of doing what we call a workflow analysis is first, identifying and removing the unnecessary steps. This is about eliminating the waste in our system, the things that drag us down and keep us from actually achieving our goals and outcomes and eat up our resources in ways they do not need to be used, right? It helps us order steps that need to be taken by people, multiple people sometimes in a particular workflow and process. And it also allows me to really think about the steps to achieve work in terms of what's happening simultaneously and what has to be sequential. In other words, I have to finish my piece of the work before I can hand it off to you. So you're in hold until I give you the piece I'm completing. Or the work sequentially, we can both be completing components and send it forward at the same time. It helps me think through who's supposed to be doing which steps, right? The task assignment within the work. We can really look at the strategic focus for a manager instead of having to constantly be looking at the daily work and the process. If I design a good process and I do effective workflow analysis and I really am able to connect these pieces and make sure all of my people understand where they fit in this, I don't have to pay attention to that on a daily basis unless things are going off the track. I can step back and take a more strategic focus on things because the work's getting done and getting done in the way in which it needs to be. So it helps me with that. It helps me really define in terms of a process the workflow and procedures. If I do that well, all employee questions are answered about how they do their jobs. It's outlined. I don't have to rely on people making decisions about the work. They know how to do the work and how we expect it to be done. This also provides me with opportunities for holding people accountable, because within that process, there are specific people assigned specific tasks. They have work that needs to be done to help them move on to the next stage. And through that, I can assign accountability for that work being done appropriately. It reduces paperwork, it reduces waste, it reduces wasted time within the system. It improves the visibility of how things are supposed to be done, which means then I can have a status check at any time in terms of if it's still being done the way I want it to be done. It takes decisions out of individual employees' hands about the next step. It's defined. For the most part, that's not to say that there are some things that surprises happen, things come up and you're like, oh, we didn't plan for that. There's not a decision node for it in our process. A new law or regulation has been handed down. We need to account for that in our process. Those are things you have to think through and adapt to. But this gives us a set of rules that really help establish the guidelines for employees. And then it helps us record what happens and what is happening, which means that if I have a medication error and I have a clearly defined process and that process is standardized, people operate this way, then it makes it much easier for me to actually analyze and investigate what happened to allow that medication error to occur. Was it a variance? Someone went off script. We had a process and they were not following it, and that created a hole where that medication error could occur? Or do we have something else going on, some other variance in the system? So when I've got that standardized, it helps in a lot of ways, right? It details my process, people, tools, and information. How is it used and how is it supposed to be combined to get this work done? It gives me something that's repeatable and standardized so that I'm more efficient and more effective. And it allows me through that to be able to investigate any kind of problems we have pop up, right? So if we go back to the types of errors that we could have occur, this gives me a way to start analysis. So with all that being said, a workflow analysis is about creating an as-is picture of the organization as it now stands. And there are steps we follow for this. In fact, in your workbook, you have both the written out steps piece by piece, which I'm going to go through, and a visual, a map of how you work through a workflow analysis. And so both of these can be applied easily and really represent the exact same thing. It just depends on whether you prefer it in a process format, a workflow format to look at. You like the picture or you want the written out steps. So we start with you pick a single process. So filling a script would be an example. Single process. And I note down all the people's tools and information, which you've already done in the past, right? We've done that in our original discussion when we started operations management. So you've got people, tools, and information defined for filling a script. The next is writing down every task and step that gets taken to accomplish this goal, and then putting them in the order in which they occur, and thinking through both people, tools, and information that's needed for each of those steps. Now, if I was doing this in a company and we were trying, or our local pharmacy, and we were really trying, we didn't have nothing in writing on a process, and we were working on creating that, I would do this either on a whiteboard or a wall with Post-it notes, and I'd have people go back and write down steps and put them up where they think they go. And then every day people go back and look at that and go, did we forget something? Oh yeah, we just did this and I haven't written that down. Go at it. Now where does it go? Until you get to a point where everybody agrees that is actually what's happening and it represents all the steps to the best of your knowledge at this stage. Now you'll validate that a little later, but this gives you a starting point for capturing that information. Now the other thing you want to do at this stage is once you've got those all mapped, to validate it, have someone take that and go watch 5 or 6 people fill a script. Watch them from coming in to when they go out. Is there anything missing on what you've mapped out in terms of steps, tools, people, information? Make note of it if there is. Then get that finalized, and now you're going to calculate and record how long on average it takes to go through these steps. I want to have an idea of if a patient's waiting, how long is the average wait time? Now your computer system may give you some of that information or not. You may need to calculate it. This requires, you can tell, this requires time and attention, and you may have to assign someone to be mapping this through for a while and actually capturing the timing information so that you can get some average times here. Make a note of the type and frequency of error that occurs at each step. So this also requires someone standing back outside of the work and really analyzing what's happening and following work through. Now this can be done in different ways. I can have a team that's doing the workflow analysis, and they're actually stationed at different parts of the pharmacy for a period of time, and their job is to just make note at a certain step of both time and error. Then I could rotate them so different people are gathering information in different places. Or I could have one person, and this person may follow a script from the beginning to the end, and they're going to miss 4 or 5 in between, come back, pick up another one, and they'll do that for a series of days. You can design this in different ways. The process is, the point is to make sure you're going through these steps to actually capture the information needed to evaluate the workflow. Then you ask some questions. Does the time to complete each task vary? If so, what is the cause of that variance? And it can be wide-ranging. It's about capturing information now. Is the error rate correlated with the speed of the task? So in other words, if I'm requiring you to go faster and faster and faster, we've talked about that, there's a point where I'm going to increase error because of the request for more speed. Is that our problem? Could we speed up or eliminate some of the steps in this process without increasing the number of errors? So we can't get rid of some steps. We have what's called required waste, which we'll talk about when we get to lean later in the semester, in the pharmacy process. And so some things you could go, yeah, I could eliminate that step, but it could increase error, and it's actually required that I have that step because of the danger of error. If we change some steps and improve our overall process, could it adversely affect other processes? Now this becomes really crucial, especially if you're in a hospital system. You can be trying to improve things in the pharmacy, in the staff pharmacy area, and in the fill time on scripts. Could be multiple things you're trying to do, but when you do that, you actually create an error in another part of the hospital system or delay in their process because you've changed things. And I look, you've got to think of this in terms of systems theory, which is a biological, really kind of developed in biology. And there's a good book, just as a side note. But systems theory is very interesting because if you think of yourself standing on a bridge over a pond and you drop a rock, right? Where the rock hits the water is where most people focus on. You could say that's where you're changing policy or changing process, right? It's the change you're making, where the rock hits the pond. But if you look at that, there are waves that concentrically move out from where that rock hit the pond. And you have a capsized boat over here and a kid drops into the drink and drowns. You have a whole school of fish get washed onto the shore over there and die, and you damage the ecosystem. I mean, you could go on and see how those waves that come out of just the one thing you changed, where your rock hit the pond, suddenly causes these other impacts throughout your system, the hospital, that you weren't prepared for, you didn't think through, and you weren't even aware that they could occur. So this is something you really have to capture information on and think through, but some things you just won't even think of as a possibility. So cut yourself a break on that. But what you want to do is make sure you check in with other places in your system to make sure you haven't capsized a boat. And if you have, that you go back to the drawing board and think through how you may need to adapt some to eliminate the problem on that end. Whereas sometimes people go, well, that's their problem. Well, no, you're part of a system. You're supposed to be supporting and coordinating, not destroying, for your own good. So think this through. Then you got to make changes as appropriate after answering these questions, exploring the options for change. Evaluate changes as appropriate after answering the questions and exploring how you may need to change to help other people, and what may work and what didn't work. Where more error was occurred, you're going to have to step back. If everything at this stage is improving and working smoothly, then you can move on to another process. If you've identified problems, you need to start over with the analysis. And if you're changing things, then as you change those things, you need to test that change, which we've talked a little bit about the use of a PDSA for that, and we'll get into that in more detail when we get into quality. But I'm going to keep going through this until I'm really solid on the fact that we have a good process in place. The workflow analysis confirms that, and we can move on to something else. So the workflow analysis is very important. If you were a new pharmacy going in and asked to manage a store, and you were trying to identify what was working, what problems existed, and that type of thing, I would start with, do you have your process already defined and on paper for me to see? Can I see the workflow and the procedures? If the answer is no, you need to do a workflow analysis just to capture that and get it on paper to begin with. If the answer is yes, then I want to validate that's what's actually happening and should be happening. So a workflow analysis will help me do that. Workflow analysis gives you tons of information you can use on how well things are actually working in your facility. So keep that in mind, and as you move into the discussion board this week, I want you to think through how you can use workflow analysis in your different facilities and how that might help in a situation like what we're facing today in those facilities. Keep safe. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, let me know.